I think we should just arrive for a moment. So I'd like to just invite you to find a posture that's comfortable, that is dignified and upright, awake and aware, but not rigid. And just if you want to soften your gaze or close your eyes, and just let's spend a couple of minutes just letting our bodies arrive, maybe letting our minds arrive in this moment, in this place, at this time. Each exhalation, just bring a little more calm, a little more relaxation. You're carrying tension in your shoulders, in your belly, around the eyes, around the jaw. Just see if you can soften a little bit. The camera was going on. To open them, and I'm going to just video problem. So I'm going to share a source sheet here. Sorry for those of you who have had a little technical issue. Um, Link is here, and I'm going to share my screen. So if you're a regular, either a follower of my podcast or have been part of other teachings, you'll know that one of the things I really value and love to teach about is spiritual practices for democratic life, habits of the heart, as it were. And so today of all days is certainly a day for that. And I thought mostly of the source that came to mind for me is really one of the foundational sources I think that we teach here at IJS in a lot of different settings. And I felt like this was appropriate for today. And it's from the Maor Einayim, Rabbi Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl, one of the early Hasidic masters. And here's what he says. We'll just start with there are 600,000 letters. How about that? There are 600,000 letters in the Torah, roughly, against which there are also 600,000 root souls, even though today there may be more or fewer than that number of Jews. There are more. Nevertheless, the essential idea is that there are 600,000 root souls, and the multiplicity of people results from the splitting of the divine sparks. Therefore, each Jew is connected to one letter in the Torah. The Torah and the Holy One are a complete unity, and each letter then represents the divine element in each person. It's actually the very letter from which their soul derives. It is this letter that pours forth divine blessings and holy, vital force. So just to unpack for a moment, right? There are roughly 600,000 letters in the Torah, and there's a tradition, an interpretive tradition, that there are 600,000 Jews, Israelites, who left Egypt. And so there's a correspondence between those two. And if you're a Hasidic Rebbe, you're going to put those two numbers together. And so the teaching here is that there are somehow like these every soul is somehow bound up with a letter in the Torah. You're Jonathan Sacks, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, um, had a book called A Letter in the Scroll. And this is where the idea came from. Every one of us has a letter in the Torah scroll. So now he says, now consider that letters dwell in the human mouth, and each letter actually is made up of all of the Torah itself. In this way, the whole of the Torah is found in our mouth. In addition, is it not also true that a Torah scroll that is missing one letter is unfit for use? Indeed, it is not even considered a Torah, since each and every letter is considered a Torah, connecting with the others to make a complete unity. So the Torah, right, if we have one letter even that's off, it has to be repaired before we can read from it in synagogue again. Now, the essence of divine service is connected to these points. Our work is to bring ourselves close to our soul root, which is the Torah, which is itself a complete unity made up of 613 commandments. We are all also composed of 248 limbs and 365 sinews, similar to the 613 commandments of the Torah. You add 248 and 365, you get 613. So there's a tradition that we have 613 mitzvot, commandments, and the human body somehow reflects that traditionally. Now, if one letter is missing from the Torah, it is not complete, which led the sages to teach one who destroys one soul is like one who destroys the whole world. And also the opposite, one who sustains a single soul is like one who has sustained the whole world. And I want to say here, the word Jewish should really not be in that teaching. And we know that now. It's very clear that the original teaching is about every soul, every individual, every person. So anyone who saves a life is as if they saved the entire world. Anyone who destroys a life is as if they took an entire world. For this reason, we say each morning before we pray, I hereby take upon myself the positive commandment of love your neighbor as yourself. All creation is a complete unity, like the Torah, which can only be called a Torah when all of its letters are present and united. Therefore, even if we see something wicked in our fellow, and this is the part that I really thought was so important, even if we see something undesirable, we should only, he says hate, it's a little strong, should only dislike that wickedness in that person, but the holy element in them we must love like ourselves. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidut, said that a fully righteous person who has no wickedness in himself sees no wickedness in anyone else. Further, anyone who sees something wrong in his fellow is like someone looking in a mirror. If his face is dirty, that is how it will appear in the mirror. But if his face is clean, then he sees no blemish. Just as he is, that is how he will appear. So this is what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, as you relate to yourself. If we see something unfavorable in ourselves, we don't hate ourselves, but that unfavorable thing. This is how we should relate to our fellow. In the end, we are all one. Does not our fellow have a divine portion and letter in the Torah, just as we have? So I think this is a good point for our practice today, a reflection of having, as I spoke about last night, extending goodwill and softening. There is so much, the camera, that seeks to divide us right now. And finding this sense of unity and this level on which we can love ourselves and love our neighbors, extend goodwill towards ourselves and our neighbors and our fellow country people. That's the impulse that I'd really like to focus on. So for the next 13 or so minutes, that's what we'll do. So if you want to, once again, just find a meditative posture. And just maybe bring yourself back to the breath if that's a comfortable anchor for you. Or to another anchor, it could be a point of contact between your body and clothing, or maybe there's a sound. Let that be your anchor. And just make an intention now to be present with your anchor. If that's the breath as I'm using, just to be aware when I'm breathing in that I'm breathing in, when I'm breathing out that I'm breathing out. Maybe just imagine that letter in the Torah scroll that is your letter. Every one of us, every one of us has a place, has a ground. Every one of us belongs here in this circle, in this Zoom room, but in this life and on this planet. This place and this moment that you're in right now. You can actually feel into that and be present in it. If we can be here now, we can be inside that letter in the scroll. Feel ourselves embraced and held and loved by a loving, divine force that continually creates and makes new in every moment. And whatever forces of constriction, fear, division, anxiety, whatever oppressive forces are weighing down on us, we can leave those forces behind and set them aside, and we can reground into the truer, deeper reality that we are loved and that we have a letter in the scroll. We can also then, once we sense that, extend that sense of welcome and belonging to those who are in our communities, those who live in our state, those who live in our country. Even if we disagree, even if we think they're wrong, even if they may cause us fear. They too are the bearers of a divine essence. And on today of all days, we can try to recognize that divine essence, that spark that's within them. It doesn't mean we have to love each other, but we do have to try, I think, to be loving towards each other, to show goodwill. To wish good health, to pray for safety and healing and well-being. Just a few moments, I'll invite you, if your eyes have been closed, to open them. Before that, just maybe just directing our hearts a little bit more towards grounding in this sense of being at home, of belonging here, now, in this moment, in this place, and extending that sense of welcome to all beings. So if your eyes have been closed, I invite you to open them, maybe take a look around at the others who are here in the Zoom space with us. Good to be together. I hope you can stick around for a little bit, if you can, I'd love to have a conversation via the chat about that practice with you. If you need to leave us, we wish you a tzedchem l'shalom, farewell, and we'll be back here tomorrow, same time and channel. Right now, we have an opportunity for those who are reciting Kaddish to do so. You're welcome in the chat to put in the name or names of anyone you are holding in heart or mind today, you're remembering. And Rachel, our wonderful tech support person today, is going to put the text of the Mourner's Kaddish up, and I invite you can unmute and join me in reciting Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shmei Rabbah Alma Divrach V'tei V'yamlich Malchutei B'chayechon V'yomechon B'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala Vizman Kariv Imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach La'olam Ula'almei Olmaya. Barach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitale V'yitala Shmei Tekudusha V'yifo La'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechamata Ta'amiran Ba'alma V'yimru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Mishmaya L'chaim Aleinu Al Kol Yisrael V'yimru Amen. V'zeh Shalom b'molav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'yimru Amen.
Amen.
And bring you, sweet Lisa.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks everyone for notes in the chat. So I would really welcome if you want to share any questions, just all caps question in the chat helps me to see that it's a question. And some folks, it looks like, are writing directly to me, which is fine. I'll see that. But if you want to share it with everyone, that's great. I got a question here. As you contemplate the 600,000 root souls, do you think in contemporary practice those root souls are only Jewish or could extend to all souls? Yeah, that's always one of the particular universalist conundrum of Jewish life, right? I think what I would say is that I think Torah is certainly our people's special heritage and special inheritance. And I think that everybody can and does feel at home in the world, right? And should be able to feel at home in the world. So we have a special home in Torah. I think that's our place. And I think that everybody has one or more special places and sense of, deep sense of being at home in the world. I remember one of the great lessons in pluralism that I learned was probably about 20 years ago. I heard a sermon by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, my teacher, who some of you heard recently did an interview about his latest book. You can find that on our YouTube channel. And my wife was pregnant with our second child. Um, and I remember Yitz was giving a talk about pluralism, and one of his teachings that God could have covenantal relationships with not just the Jews, but with other people, which is a controversial notion to some thinkers, right? How could there be other covenantal peoples? And I remember it occurred to me as I was sitting there in shul and listening, I thought, we have one child and I love this child infinitely, right? And now we're going to have a second baby, God willing, and I'm going to love that child infinitely. Now, how is it possible, right? That like, that our hearts can expand in that way. But if I can do that, right? Kal v'chomer, all the more so, right? What could divinity do, right? So of course, God can have multiple relationships and feel and have a covenantal relationship with multiple peoples. So I think that same spirit, I would sort of respond to this question is, yeah, we've got our special language and our special relationship. And I think that all human beings, as we just read in last week's Torah portion, Noach, right? There's a covenant with all of humanity. And I think the ability to feel deeply at home um, is part of that covenant. So that's how I would read it. That's how I would understand it. Um, I see. Okay, I got some other questions that just came in. All right. So I see Pam's question here. I found myself imagining that I was a particular letter, a lamed, okay, and was curious if others felt drawn to specific letters too, and also if there is any significance to the letters you chose. Fascinating. Wow, great question. Yeah, I'd love to hear what other people think. I actually had the thought of like asking if you know the first letter of your name. You might imagine in Hebrew, you might, so in my case, it would be a yud, right? And so like a point, which is the smallest letter. Um, so that's a really interesting question. Um, Lori also has a question. Recently, I've had the thought that I'd like to start understanding, developing, and capturing my Torah. Everyone has their own Torah, right? Any ideas on how to do this? Wow. Um, well, I'll tell you what I do. Um, so I have had a and many of you probably subscribe to my Friday morning reflections. Writing weekly has been a spiritual practice for me for over 25 years. I think when I first went to yeshiva, and I found that during the week, I would just be filled up with so much stuff, and I needed some way to kind of process it and make sense of it. And I started writing emails. I was living in Israel. It was a year after college, and I started writing to an email list of friends and family, like 20 people, just with some reflections for the week. And that turned into a weekly series of Divrei Torah. And on and off, over the last 25 years, I've had that practice, pretty more years than not. And I have found that for me is a way of, chewing and processing. So writing can work for you, and it can be different types of writing, or it could be through different practices that we have. The one thing I would say is I find that having a regular discipline to it, the weekly Torah portion can be a really wonderful thing for that because it's just built in. It's every week, right? And so you can set a time and say, all right, this is time I'm going to spend. A lot of people, I think, through our tech study program that we run at IJS, not too late to sign up, find that as well. It can be a regular study, and then having a creative outlet might be that. I know, there are people who make artwork, there are people who do movement, there are people who might do song or poetry. Um, I would also recommend, in that regard as well, Rabbi Adina Allen's book, The Place of All Possibility. I'm going to be doing a book talk with her next week. Um, And if you haven't read the book, highly recommend. And if you haven't signed up for the book talk, recommend. She's great, and it's a really wonderful book about creative process and how creativity and Torah, are really really linked. So, um, okay, seeing here also some wonderful other reflections. There's a question here. Yeah, spiritual direction. Yeah, that's a great idea too, as a practice. There was, hold on, there was one question I saw. Oh, how do we do this practice with folks who do violence, like those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th or other violence in the streets? Right. Um, that's hard. Um, and that question has come up a lot since October 7th, I think, also for a lot of us, right? Um, And what I would say is twofold. Number one, um, even though there were plenty of people, lots of people who participated in January 6th, it was still ultimately a small number of people, right? And the challenge for most of us, unless we know somebody directly who is engaging in violence, is not necessarily, that is not directed towards those people. It's directed towards people who might be of a different political persuasion than us. Um, so I would just anytime, this often happens in these kind of conversations. We go to, the hardest examples, and just a reminder that 99.9% of life is not lived with the hardest examples, right? It's lived, closer in. I think when we get to the hardest examples, you know, I haven't been I haven't been up close with somebody who's, been a perpetrator of that kind of violence. So I can't say exactly, what I would do. But my hope is if we take the teaching of the Maori Naim seriously, um, we can judge and hold accountable for the behavior, right? For the sin, for the violence that's done, and still recognize that even within that, right, there is a divine spark that's still present in that person, right? And how can we? The difficulty is the challenge of how do we hold all of that that we can, that it's possible. And so it means I think working skillfully with that is what. So that would be my response. I don't think there's a simple answer to that, but. Uh, And Harris, I appreciate what you're saying. My sense is that it's not about all of them, but one-on-one with one you meet or someone you know who supports that action, right? Um, okay, thank you. Um, oh, I got a question to repeat. Adina Allen is the book. It's called The Place of All Possibility. And maybe Rachel, you can pull up the sign up link for the talk. We can put that in the chat. That would be great. Um, Okay, yeah, lots of good conversation here, I see. Um, um, Deborah says, what happens if the wrong person wins the election? What happens? Uh, I think whoever wins the election, we keep, we do the same thing. We pray and we practice. Our prayers might be a little different, and our prayers might be a little, and our practice might be a little different. But uh, but no matter who, there's plenty of work still to do. So yeah, we're present with whatever the reality is, right? We're present with whatever the reality is. Um, uh, Judith, I see you had raised a hand. I don't know if you're having a hard time typing in. But did you have a question? Not sure. Okay. Oh, hold on. We're not hearing you there. Can maybe
Can
just.
I just give you what happened? It was specifically to what you were just talking about with the election. We went to dinner the other night, and there were, I'd say, 20 people right in front of the restaurant that we had to walk through of the other political persuasion. And at the time, I had anger and upset. Today, I meditated on those exact people, and something in me began to care.
Sweet.
It was, listen to my voice. It
Mhm.
was a compassion,
Mhm.
loving both self and them. And I thought, I actually care about them. Not in a way of, oh, poor babies, I feel sorry for them because they don't have the truth. It was different, Rabbi. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, and I think that's a wonderful example of just, softening. And um and it's hard, right? If it were easy, we wouldn't have to practice. If it were easy, they wouldn't call it work, right? So this is why we often say this is why we practice, and this is I guess I conclude with this is this is why I think this kind of practice that mindfulness practice is so important for living in a diverse democracy, is that democracy is always about we if we do it right, none of us should be getting our way 100% of the time, and most of us should have about an equal amount of times that we don't get our way. Right? We should equally distribute the sacrifice if it's working right. When it's out of whack is when one group is getting asked to sacrifice, or certain groups are getting asked to sacrifice over and over and over again. Um, but all of us have to be able um, to be satisfied with not getting what we want and still feel like we're at home. And that's emotional work and spiritual work. It's not simply intellectual work. And so, the kinds of feelings that you're just describing, I think are really present. I think they're very countercultural because these are not the kinds of things that our media or our political discourse tends to emphasize. And so I'm grateful to everybody who's here for taking the time to do it, and encourage all of us to keep doing it in the days and the months and years to come. So I think that's a good place for us to probably pause it. And again, I'll just say Mark will be leading a special sit tomorrow night. We'll be back tomorrow, regular time, and we're here, we're here every day for you. So thank you so much, everybody. Great to be with you, and blessings for a peaceful election day.